And welcome back to the Hot Lap, where we are looking at the Heineken Dutch Grand Prix 2023 qualifying. And surprise, surprise, it is drumroll Max Verstappen on pole. We figured that anyway. To be fair, this was quite an entertaining qualifying session because we had a few surprises, which we'll get into. I mean, if I told you that Logan Sargent out-qualified Hamilton, yet it was him that had the crash. Interesting, if you haven't seen qualifying. So, Max Verstappen on pole. It wasn't easy going for him, though. He moaned a bit about the grip because it was very much a wet session to begin with. All the drivers out there, I think, on inters, and then it ended up in Q3, the last qualifying session, being dry. As a once again, classic. My phone, it always goes off. I really should put it on mute, but never mind. Okay, Max Verstappen on that pole position. Lando Norris in second. Really, really good. Did absolutely fantastic. And it looked at one point like we could have a McLaren front row, but red flags aplenty came out. George Russell qualifying in third. He didn't do, I'll be honest, he didn't do too bad either, really, compared to, obviously, to his teammate, which we'll get into. Alex Albon in fourth. At one point, he was third. He's been looking absolutely epic all weekend, has Albon. Absolutely fantastic. And, I mean, that Williams, are they setting up for qualifying? Are they setting their car up for qualifying? I do not know. However, they are also quite good in a straight line, could be quite hard to pass. So given a decent strategy, where could they finish? Definitely. I mean, you'd be disappointed if they're not in the top 10. Fernando Alonso in fifth. Once again, not bad. Beat his teammate. And he showed, that's kind of, I guess, about where Aston Martin really are. Carlos Sainz in sixth. Not bad again from Carlos Sainz. And once again, after Belgium, we thought Ferrari did look, at least on race pace, to be the second or third fastest car. Weren't here today, though, were they? Perez, for me, one of the two biggest disappointments of the session. He is in fact, for Max Verstappen, as you can see here, on a 110.567, and Perez on a 111.80, like over a second. I know it's mixed conditions, but it was all pretty much dry. And he's seventh. I mean, that's not good enough. It's just lucky that Red Bull have this dominant car, as I keep saying, and they are going to win both championships. Because if they weren't, you really have to have that question mark. What a relief it must be for Perez, though, that Ricciardo won't be around for a couple of races. We'll get into that in a bit as well. So, Charles Leclerc ninth. He spun and caused a red flag. It looked really, really amateur hour there for Charles Leclerc and a few others, including Logan Sargent. But he's ninth, and there's talk potentially of he may change his gearbox, he may not. In 10th, we have a Logan Sargent in the Williams Mercedes. First time in Q3. I think the first time, I can't remember exactly when. They said since the days of Michael Andretti in 1993 at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, we've had someone qualify, an American qualify in the top 10. So really, really good. And it shows that Williams is doing really good here. I mean, Williams are almost McLaren-esque, haven't they, in their comeback. Really, really happy for Williams. 11th is Lance Stroll. Once again, not good enough, really, compared to Alonso. Pierre Gasly, the top Alpine in 12th. But let's get into, unlucky for some, car number 44. But in 13th place for Lewis Hamilton. Big disappointment for him. And just, I mean, on pace, potentially, not good enough, not really good enough. Hamilton himself said he burnt out the tyres. Did he go too early? Was he a bit premature in that speed one, which ended up, he was at 9th or 10th at some point, and then you just saw him drop down. And on his final lap, he just didn't have the pace. But amateur hour again, really, for Mercedes, because given the fact that George Russell is third, and throughout yesterday, Hamilton definitely had a couple of tenths on him. So potentially Hamilton could be even starting on the front row. Alas, that's not to happen there. So Mercedes have got to, do something special. Hamilton said he's not really suggested that it's hard to overtake and there's a bit downbeat going into the race. Never say never. It should be dry for the race, albeit it's near the sea. When you're near the sea, mixed conditions can change so quickly. I mean, we went from raining, so absolute sunshine needing a tanning lotion towards the end, didn't we? Sonoda in 14th, that's about as where you'd kind of expect them to be. Hulkenberg 15th in the Haas, okay, not too bad. And then we have the people that were kicked out. The shocking one here, Esteban Ocon in 17th, Zhou in 16th, Magnussen sort of disappointing. I mean, he's been given that contract for Haas, he's an 18th. And Bottas being out qualified by Zhou. And Liam Lawson, I mean, he's done a really good job. He had to come in. I don't think he's driven this car in the wet. So he had to come in an FP3. The first time he would have driven that car in the dry would have been at this circuit that he hasn't had much practice at. So fair play to Liam Lawson. Let's see what he can do in the race. I mean, this could be his time to shine. If he does an amazing, as I mentioned yesterday, if he does do like a Nick de Vries type drive, potentially we could see, could he replace Perez? Or could he be, replace someone at AlphaTauri? Who knows? But here we go. Key Hamilton error analysed after Q2 exit at the Dutch Grand Prix. This is on planetf1.com by Jamie Woodhouse. It goes on to say that McLaren's Lewis Hamilton was a surprise Q2 casualty. And as we know, ex-Aston Martin strategy chief Bernie Collins, from as you may see on Sky, she explains that the 7-time champ pushed 1 lap too early. While much of Saturday at the circuit Zandvoort had a damp affair, the clouds would clear through Q2 and cause the track to dry rapidly. That meant the key to making Q3 would be getting your best lap time getting your best lap time right at the end. This is a reality which Hamilton ended up finding out the hard way, which we've spoken about. The 7-time champ struggling to improve on his final Q2 push lap, leading to him returning to the pit lane as he waved the white flag on his Q3 ambitions. Bernie Collins would then analyse this upset for Sky F1, explaining that Hamilton had been pushing a lap too early, meaning the peak energy levels in his Mercedes W14 and tyre performance were gone come that final lap when he should have been in that sweet spot. However, I think Planet F1 have got another story here by the everyone's favourite manager, everyone's favourite manager, Toto Wolff. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff was far from pleased with what he deemed an instance of impeding from Yuki Tsunoda, which saw Hamilton exit Dutch Grand Prix qualifying at Q2. Now, Hamilton, it says, was left with one final push lap to escape the elimination and secure his place in that final qualifying session. However, he's set to start from 13th, though interventions from the stewards may change potentially. Both Tsunoda and Stroll are under steward investigations for allegedly impeding Hamilton, Wolff pointing the finger specifically at the Tsunoda incident as the cause for Hamilton's Q2 exit. He says, "It's a shame because the pace was there all weekend and we would have had 2 cars competing right at the front." He goes on to say that overall the session, a mixture between maybe being too close to Lando Norris, but that's not the main thing. The impeding is just a disaster in Q2, and I think this quickest lap he was impeded by Tsunoda going into the final straight, and that cost the position. He goes on to say, "I think the backing off on the first flying lap would be us because he was too close to Norris, and then you're a little bit out of sync. But I think the thing was the impeding. You need to have this 1 lap at the end, and he didn't have that." So poor. I guess poor Lewis, 13th. What can he do from there? We'll have a chat about that in a bit. But from motorsport.com, Norris has said worst second half of a lap. Still enough to secure second. Now, Norris has rated the second half of his best F1 Dutch qualifying as the worst he's ever produced on his way to the front row. The McLaren driver was the best of the rest behind a dominant Max Verstappen qualifying second, but just over half a second off, exactly 0.537 off Max. Norris briefly looked a threat for pole in their final Q3 runs, going quickest in the first sector, but conceded his second half of the lap, which is where he lost so much time to Verstappen, was poor by his own standards. Now, before we go on, what I thought was quite interesting in relation to this is that we had obviously Verstappen, and we had 2 red flags as the track was drying. It was quite clear it was pretty much for slicks at the beginning. And we had the Logan Sargent crash and then the Leclerc crash. So no one had really set any decent time that was going to be pole because it wasn't looking like rainy again. And the McLarens, I felt, did look better than the Red Bulls than Verstappen, let's say, at the time. But is that because, though, as we've seen this year, a bit like the Haas, the McLarens can really light up their tyres really, really quite well. But sometimes, especially early on in the season, that's been a bit of an issue with tyre wear. And I can't help but wonder that had we not had those red flags, we may have had someone different. We may well have had a McLaren and pole. But as Murray Walker and Mark Blundell said, if is F1 spelled backwards. So there we go. So the first half of the lap was mega. The second half of the lap was probably one of the worst second halves that I've done, Norris said. So it peaked very early on. It's tough, but I really enjoy these conditions. I've always enjoyed the conditions. It's when we do well. I'm taking the P2 still. Now, asked what caused the second half of the lap drop, Norris said the driver, the tyres were good until the end. The driver peaked very early. I've got a lot of work to do. Not the most comfortable, but good enough. I'll take it. But given Verstappen's utter dominance and having threatened top spot throughout practice and qualifying, Norris felt second place was a solid result. He said, I'm happy still. P2 was a good result. I guess in these kinds of conditions, every now and again, you hope Max makes a mistake, and he doesn't. Frustrating in a little way, he said, but I'm very happy. The team have done a great job. It was a chaotic qualifying, but another P2. So, I mean, when we look on F1.com, Formula1.com, what are the results going to be tomorrow? I think Max Verstappen probably going to win, barring anything funny happening at the first corner. Now, Lando Norris, he doesn't really do starts well, but I said that once, and then he ended up leading the British Grand Prix. It's absolutely conceivable that he does. I kind of get frustrated, probably like a lot of other fans, though, when Verstappen's leading and they just kind of like, or not leading, or he's second or third, and it feels like they just let him out of the way because it's inevitable. And I always think, if I was a team boss, and maybe this is the reason I'm not, I'd look at that and be like, well, why do you give up that position? You don't know. You never know. By holding him up 3 or 4 corners or 3 or 4 laps, and at some point he may get a penalty. And then because of that, you end up getting that position back towards the end of the race. You never know because you held him up. Because you held him up those few laps, what happens if he makes a mistake? Goes off, and because you held him up, you're close enough to him to pass him again. Or there's a mistake in a pit stop. You never know. You never, ever give up. So when I see people just letting people pass really easily, it makes me sad. It makes me sad because you never know. And by not blocking someone rudely, but by trying to drive, I guess, defensively and stopping them getting past to the best within the rules, obviously, they might make a mistake and go off. You never know. But there we go. Max Verstappen's really realistically going to win. I do think Norris is going to get a podium. It wouldn't surprise me if that is your top 3, maybe even in a different order. I would love for Alex Albon to get on the podium or at least retain his 4th place. I think Piastri in 8th is a lot, like Perez, should be up there and is a lot faster than their qualifying. Leclerc and Sainz, Sainz had a good qualifying. I don't really know how. It'd be interesting to see how fast that Ferrari is after the Belgian Grand Prix in the race. I do think, given the lack of any funny incidents, Hamilton were probably going to get into the points. Maybe the top 6 at an absolute push, but I do feel he should, and barring anything funny happening at the first corner, he should get in the points as well. But it is looking like a Max Verstappen home victory for a 3rd year in a row, pole and home victory for a 3rd year in a row. Okay, so there we go. That's been it. This has been the Hot Lap, and I will speak to you guys soon.